Welcome to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills, where we present clear thinking on confusing topics in challenging times. And we are definitely in a most challenging time. Our topic for today's show is What Now? After the U.S. presidential and general election, we have Sherri Mitchell with us, an Indigenous attorney, activist, and author from the Penobscot Nation. She also goes by Wana Hamu Kwasit. She is a graduate of the University of Arizona's Rogers College of Law, specializing in Indigenous peoples' law and policy. She is an alumna of the American Indian Ambassador Program and the Udall Native American Congressional Internship Program. Sherri is the author of the award-winning book, Sacred Instructions, Indigenous Wisdom for Living Spirit-Based Change. She is also a contributor to 11 anthologies, including the bestseller All We Can Save, Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis, and Resetting Our Future, Empowering Climate Action in the United States. Sherri is the founding director of the Land Peace Foundation, an organization dedicated to the preservation of Indigenous rights and the protection of the Indigenous way of life. She serves as a trustee for the American Indian Institute, as an advisory council member for Nia Taro's Indigenous Land Guardianship Program, and as a board member for the Post Carbon Institute. Sherri was also a member of the development team for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, if you're familiar. Action for Climate Empowerment, providing education, engagement, training, and workforce development for climate action in the United States. Sherri is the recipient of several human rights awards, including the Mahoney Dunn International Human Rights and Humanitarian Award and the University of Maine Alumni International Human Rights Award, and her portrait is featured in the esteemed Americans Who Tell the Truth portrait series. Sherri is also the convener of the global healing ceremony, Healing the Wounds of Turtle Island, a gathering that has brought more than 50,000 people together from 6 continents to focus on healing our relationships with one another and with the natural world. She speaks and teaches around the world on issues of Indigenous rights, earth rights, and transformational socio-spiritual change. Welcome, Sherri Mitchell.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. I know it's a busy time and a challenging time and an overwhelming time for all of us. And so I kind of just want to take a breath with you as, you know, we've seen so many, I guess my friends at least have been going through so many emotions at this time. And I'm wondering how you are responding to this election. I saw that you had opened a fire at your ceremonial pit in Maine, and I'm just wondering how everything is going.
Well, as with all things, we're taking it in stride, and recognizing that though there is a considerable amount of harm that is likely to come our way, we have some capacity to continue to create change. My brother messaged me the morning after the election when he got to work, and he hadn't looked at the news prior to that. And so he said, we're going to have to deal with another 4 years of no progress. And I said to him, I believe we might have more progress than we normally do. It just won't be political. And so here's an opportunity for people to break away from what I call, this dependency syndrome of colonial patriarchal society, and to begin taking responsibility for creating a world that they actually want to inhabit, that's more closely resembling the world that they most closely want to inhabit. And so I have a form of hope that I carry at this time that's not grounded in magical thinking, that's grounded in experiential awareness that our ancestors, no matter who we are, have gone through very, very dark times and survived. And we are now going into some very dark times. That hope of our ancestral resilience gives me some strength and some focus during this time. But I also think that it's really important to recognize the moment, because this is a pivotal moment. And how we pivot at this time is really going to determine our future direction, because we are witnessing some sad realities within our fellow man. And it's not just in the United States, it's true around the world, that there's an emergence of focused retrenchment against change that's rising up that can cause some real harm that it'll take us generations to recover from.
When you were talking, I got a little teary-eyed. I have my own Chinese ancestors and my white ancestors. And so I guess what I wanted to ask you is, how do we think about our ancestry? We have these ancestors who we can respect and look up to, who tended the land, who cared for the land for some people, but then for white people, where do white people go? And I wonder if you have an answer for that for folks.
I have ideas. I don't know if I have answers. This is a question that I get quite often. And the truth of the matter is, every single one of us has ancestors who lived in harmonious balance with the earth. Otherwise, our humanoid species wouldn't be here. And so it's really only been in the last few centuries that human beings have lived in a way that has been counter to the survival of the planet and our species. And so you don't have to go back very far to find an ancestor who lived in a way that was connected to the earth. And there's a perspective difference between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people that I think also might be helpful in this time, in relation to how you view yourself in relation to space and time. And so if we think about the ideology of Western thought, it tends to move in a linear fashion through time. And so if you believe that you're moving in a linear fashion through time, then you're moving away from your ancestors. Indigenous peoples oftentimes don't see themselves in relation to linear time. And so we don't see ourselves as moving through time across space. Instead, of being time oriented, we are spatially oriented. So we're connected to a specific place oftentimes. And that spatial orientation actually roots us in a specific place. And time does not move away from us from that place in linear fashion, but rather it wraps around us. So we are connected to all of the things that happen in time within that space. And so that's why our future and past generations, our ancestors and our future generations, seem so close to us, because they're literally wrapped around us in an embrace as time winds around us, rather than moving away from us in linear fashion. And so when you have this spatial orientation that helps you to understand the sacredness of the ground that you're standing on, you're aware that it's not just due to proximity or your specific connection, so to speak, with that particular land, but the recognition that there have been myriad events that have happened upon that land. People have lived, they've died, they've hoped, they've grieved, they've loved, they've lost. And all of the essence of that experience is contained within that land that you're standing on in any given moment. And so this notion that there's this loss of connection from one's ancestors is really just a perspective shift. So if you just shift your vision away from being oriented with linear time towards being oriented to spatial awareness and the sacredness of the place that you occupy, and all of the essence of life that's contained within that soil that makes that soil holy ground or sacred ground, you start to see your life in connection to all of the lives that have been lived there to date and those that will continue to live there beyond your time. And so you don't feel so isolated in a moment. You feel kind of held by the essence of all of that life that has existed in that place. And so for those who feel that they are disconnected from or lost to their ancestors, this earth has held all life that has ever existed here. All of the air that we breathe has been breathed by our ancestors. The water that we drink has gone through the body of every living being that has ever been on this earth. We are not distant from them. We're just disconnected in our minds in relation to the way that we see things. And so if we can just change our minds, we can have that connection renewed just by putting our bare feet on the earth. So that's what I would say. Those are my thoughts on that. It really is an imagined separation, and it's an imagined separation that's causing us to be in the situation that we're in socially right now in the world.
Thank you. You are listening to 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM across the California Central Coast. K Squid, your ink spot on the dial. And we are talking to Sherri Mitchell of the Penobscot Nation, who is an attorney and an activist and a teacher and an author, about the election and looking to our ancestors, looking to a sense of rootedness actually outside of time or inside of time, but not in the flow of time that we normally think of. And I really appreciate what you said about ancestors, Sherri, because sometimes I just laugh. Things are so bad at the federal level and all the appointments to the cabinets and so forth. And I know you feel this because you've been a climate activist and a climate author and a climate researcher. And so it's just so horrendous that I can only laugh. And I think of my first very important spiritual teacher, who was a man by the name of Sidney Banks, and I will laugh with him as well, because sometimes that's all we've got is laughter and kindness. That's sort of what is occurring to me, is laughter and kindness. Fear is huge right now. I wonder if you want to speak to the fear, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Mm. I think that fear is interesting. I have had a lot of experience engaging with fear, and fear, like so many other things, like anger, outrage, doesn't exist on its own. Immense joy, none of these things exist on their own. And so when I have powerful emotion rising up within me, the thing that becomes most important for me is understanding what's underneath it. What is it that I love that is at risk? And so as fear rises within us, can we focus on what it is that we love that's at risk? Who do we love that's at risk? What is it that fear is overlaying? And then when we identify what that is, we can start to really think about, how do we begin to put into place layers of protection around those we love? How do we begin to be proactive about the ways that we are preparing for supporting, nurturing, protecting, healing what we are most afraid of being wounded? And I think that this is the most productive thing that we can be doing right now, is to really think about, where is the anger and the rage coming from? Where is the fear coming from? Where is this deep grief coming from? And begin to work on alleviating in some way the suffering of those who are underlaying that heavy emotion that's inspiring it to rise up within you? Is it your personal sense of freedom? Is it a sense of violation that you're feeling personally in your body, which a lot of women are feeling right now? Is it fear for your children? Is it fear for your friends or your partner, your mother, your sister? Is it fear for those who are least advantaged within our societies, who are being threatened with further harm through deportation and the loss of livelihood and a number of other what will be catastrophic harms to them? And how do we begin the process of preparing ourselves to care for one another in ways that are much deeper than the ways that we have been caring for one another to date?
You talked about hope actually in the midst of what people are finding a very hopeless situation or seeing as a very hopeless situation. You talked about it surprised me when you said hope, that you had more hope in some ways, and you talked about stepping outside of the colonial imperialist, I imagine capitalist system is what you're speaking to, and creating a world that we want to live in. And so I wonder if you could speak more about that, because I think some folks are going to be like, okay, I wish I could hang out with Indigenous people and be with Sherri, at her retreat center or lodge or what you've got there. And others of us are in urban environments, and we do have sometimes our gardens, our community gardens, and our areas where we do help each other out. So I wonder if you could talk more about that, because that's what's occurring to me is the idea of mutual aid and community more than anything, being more responsible for growing food, protecting our waters and so forth. But I wonder what you mean and if you could explicate.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that the societal structure that we live under has done to us is it has made us very dependent on the system. And it has caused us to farm out the care of those who are in need. And so if somebody's hungry, we send them to a food pantry. If somebody needs shelter, we send them to a homeless shelter. If somebody is struggling, we send them to a mental health facility. And we send people to pastors and ministers and priests and holy men and women. And one of the things that I think this time is going to call for is for us to move beyond that childlike dependence in the status quo of the system. When those systems of care begin to fall away, it gives us an opportunity to once again reclaim our role of being caretakers of one another. And so I have hope for a greater degree of change during this time, because people won't so easily be able to slip back into complacency when their threat is not something that's theoretical and a political talking point, but a faced reality. People show up a little bit differently. And I think if we had learned the lesson of that, the last time we had the opportunity, the prompt for that to happen, we would be in a very different place. But rather than learning how to care for one another, learning how to begin to eliminate divisions, learning how to become more inclusive and caring and curious, we have become more vitriolic. We have become much less kind. We have become more judgmental. The divides between us have gotten deeper. And this moment, this second prompt, is giving us an opportunity to rethink those things, and to hopefully respond differently. I think that one of the things, we had a women's gathering here. We had both a women's and men's gathering in the last few months. And I was talking to the women that were here. And we had 177 women that came from all over. And asking them to really think about the role of men in our society and to recognize that this imbalanced patriarchy, which is an unhealthy, toxic expression of masculinity. There are healthy patriarchs in families around the world who provide an example of a loving, protective guardian and teacher and caretaker, just like healthy mothers and grandmothers do in matriarchal societies all over the world and in families around the world. But what we're dealing with within the society is this really imbalanced, toxic aspect of patriarchal power that is absent of heart. And so when we're thinking about eradicating the hold that society has upon us, we can sometimes mistakenly place the blame for the extraction of the masculine heart from that system on the men who have experienced that violence against themselves. And so, what is our role as women who are the keepers of intuitive wisdom and heart based knowledge to help the men find their way back to their hearts? That this expression of telling men that their time is over, that there's no place for them within society, that they need to sit down and shut up, that they have nothing left to offer, especially to young men whose lives are just beginning, has created this massive backlash that won the election for Donald Trump. And if we don't start taking responsibility and accountability for healing that deep wound within the masculine aspect of society, and contributing to the reconnection of that heart-based energy in expression within our societies, then we're going to continue to see a backlash that is going to come back and it's going to harm women. And so we really do have a responsibility to step up and become our best selves in this moment. We have this responsibility to dig deeply and to find within us the compassion that appears to be lacking within the society right now, because that's what is most needed.
Yeah, that's an interesting take because I know for myself, I have felt anger with my fellow lefty activists who were talking about the duopoly and the two-party system. It's all the same, and vote Jill Stein. And I think I'm not quite past that anger, but I do know it's not helpful. I just have felt it, and I've expressed it a little bit. But to take responsibility is something quite radical, and nobody, people do, but the fact that most people don't, perhaps, is, I think, part of what's contributing to what we're dealing with, is no one wants to take responsibility for themselves, for their own anger, for their own projections, for their own fears. And so I really appreciate that. I think Adrienne Marie Brown was sharing on social media this exercise where you write down on a piece of paper everything that you blame others for. And who do you blame? Write them all down, every single one, including the society or the capitalist system or whatever it is. And then take another piece of paper and write down everything that you could blame yourself for, for the same problem. And then she said, and then look at both of those and find some balance there. I really was impressed with your Facebook post of November 7th. And if it's okay, I'm going to read the first part. And then you posted a poem, which I'd love for you to read, by Cheelan Harkin. But here's how you introduced it. First, we grieve, not the loss of some political seat, but the apparent absence of collective compassion. Then we dig through the ash to find our spark and breathe into it until it flames. We continue to do deep breath work until that flame becomes a roaring beacon that illuminates our hearts. The world needs our light more than ever right now. I'm holding you close with tender love and envisioning myself being held as well. Keep reaching out and clasping hands with all of your beloveds and I'll do the same. We need each other.
Yeah.
We need all of these wise words. And yeah, so you have this poem. I actually don't know the title.
Yeah. I don't know the title either. I just stumbled upon it and I loved it. And as you said, it's by Chilin Harkin, and here it is. It's when the earth shakes and foundations crumble that our light is called to rise up. It's when everything falls away and shakes us to the core and awakens all of our hidden ghosts that we dig deeper to find once inaccessible strength. It's in times when division is fierce that we must reach for each other and hold each other much, much tighter. Do not fall away now. This is the time to rise. Your light is being summoned. Your integrity is being tested, that it may stand more tall. When everything collapses, we must find within us that which is indomitable. Rise and find strength in your heart. Rise and find the strength in each other. Burn through your devastation. Make it your fuel. Bring forth your light. Now is not the time to be afraid of the dark.
That's so beautiful. And thank you so much, Sherri Mitchell. We are talking with Sherri Mitchell, an Indigenous leader, activist, author, spiritual teacher. And I'm excited to talk to her more about the work she does in the Penobscot Nation. We will be right back after this break and this message from our underwriter.
KSQD thanks GPI Builders for supporting this program. GPI Builders is a locally owned and operated full-service construction company with more than 10 years of experience and expertise. GPI Builders specializes in home additions, ADUs, and residential remodels throughout the Bay Area. For more information, 1-800-916-8343 or gpibuilders.com. Thank you, GPI Builders, for supporting community radio, K-Squid.
Welcome back to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills. We are talking to Sherri Mitchell, an Indigenous author, educator, spiritual leader, climate activist. She wears many hats. She's won many awards. She's written many books and been featured in many books about climate and climate activism. And we've been talking about the election, which maybe we're all trying to avoid thinking about so much right now. And what can we do now? How can we think now? And, you said something before the break, Sherri, about, we call it mutual aid in a lot of circles, mutual aid, helping each other. I mean, there are other words we can use, just like helping each other, taking responsibility. And I think about the unhoused. We have a very large unhoused population in our city, one of the highest per capita in the state of California, which has a lot of unhoused people. And we are always sort of in a kind of bickering about what to do and, what kinds of resources people need. And I've always thought, part of the problem is how we're dehumanizing people in our minds. When we talk about people who don't have homes right now. And I thought, people, because I've volunteered to work, with the unhoused and mental health groups and wellness groups. And that's when you see the human being. That's when you connect with the human being. So I had this thought, we should do more connecting together, even if maybe it's just once a week where someone goes to help out, in some way. And it does feel like we just need much more of that. The Republican Party, you said something about division, and the Republican Party just came out in our community, and normally they're quite quiet because they're the minority. We're a very blue area. And they just came out publicly and said, we're not going to be afraid anymore. And when I saw the headline, I got scared. I was like, oh, what are they going to... Are they going to go after all the trans people and the gay people? Like, what are they saying? And then I had the thought, I want to go talk to them. Like, maybe I should have them on the radio show. So I'm wondering what you mean by the division. Is that sort of what you're thinking? Is that we're just not connecting with each other? Or what do you see about division?
I think that there are some fundamental things that we disagree on. And I am not of the mind that we can disagree and set our disagreements aside when people's rights and safety are at stake, when there is an intention for deep oppression, and when we have women openly being threatened on the street by young men who are saying things like, your body, my choice. Um, I think that those are very real things that people are reacting to viscerally. And I also think that when we have conversations with human beings, eye to eye, breath to breath, heart to heart, we always find that we have far more in common than we disagree on. And if we can begin away from the fire of the things that we disagree on, looking at, working on the things we have in common, then we have the opportunity to perhaps heal some of the division that has been created. What's really been successful over the last 10 years has been a marketed strategy of creating fear and division for the purpose of keeping folks divided. That benefits very, very few and harms the many. And so, if we, the many, begin to unravel ourselves from the clutches of that mind control, because it's really what it is, and start working towards building relationships with one another again, trying to find the humanity in one another again, talking to each other in ways that demonstrate our care for one another, we have an opportunity to shift the trajectory that we're on. If we continue to feed the divide and point fingers and make judgments and condemnations and feel self-righteous, which many people do on both sides of this equation, we're likely all heading for a real catastrophically dark time. And it's almost cliche at this point, because throughout time, in times like these, all of the great thinkers of those days have said exactly the same thing. And we know that it is the creation of division, the separation, the distancing from one another that is part of the propaganda machine of authoritarian rule. It is part of the propaganda machine of every horrific genocide that has happened throughout history. And the way that we are able to push back against the emergence of that is through reconnection, reestablishment of relationships, elimination of distancing, and a shortening of the divide by building bridges. And we all have the capacity to do that. And so there have been a lot of people who have felt left behind for a lot of years, who are simply tired of status quo politics. Those people, in a misguided fashion, perhaps, did not consciously vote for hate, though that's the implication and the unfortunate likely outcome of what's happened. They just wanted something different. How are we going to know what that is, and how we find new ways to offer them a pathway to getting their needs met if we don't have conversation with them? How do we find out how disenfranchised young men are feeling in relation to the casting out from society that has happened to them over the last several years, as we've been over the last decade, as we have been trying to distance ourselves from the imbalanced and toxic nature of the patriarchal society that we've been living in. How do we find meaningful engagement for them within the society and a place for them? How do we reconnect them to the heart that's been missing from masculine expression in our society if nobody is offering them meaningful engagement and rites of passage and an opportunity to be seen and to feel valued? And this is the only way that we're going to be able to change the realities that we're living in, is for us to change.
Thank you so much, Sherri Mitchell. The book she's talking about is Sacred Instructions, and this is a book that really profoundly touched me, and that's when I first reached out to get Sherri Mitchell on this radio show and podcast. One of our very first episodes is with Sherri Mitchell. You can go back and find that episode in our archives on, all the different platforms and on the K-Squid site. You are listening to KSQD 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM on the California Central Coast. And again, we're talking to Sherri Mitchell. When you talked about enoughness, it occurred to me, there's a quote from Lao Tzu, who is a Chinese philosopher, who said, "The truly wealthy man is the one who knows he has enough." And someone gave me this card. I had it on the wall of my office for a while, and it was there. It was a nice thing to look at and think about. But one day I looked at it and I thought, whoa, I just kind of got blown away by this insight that not only did I have enough, I had more than enough. And so it strikes me that a lot of these people who are in power now or seeking power have never really thought about, do I have enough?
Yeah. And I don't think that they've ever not thought about that. I think that what happens for those people is that they are consumed by hungry ghosts. I mean, they have this aching hole within them that's not being filled by meaning, that they're trying to fill with consumptive goods. And that ache for connection and belonging and for a sense of value beyond monetary value in the world is never going to be soothed through the consumption of monetary goods. And so there's this hoarding effect that takes over the psyche of those individuals, because they don't understand the value of their own life beyond commercial terms. And so, one of the jokes that I tell probably far too often is that, we've commodified all aspects of our being, that even when someone is single, we say that they're on the market. And so if you don't know how to think about the value that you hold in the world beyond some type of commodified measure, then you're never going to feel full. And so that sense of fullness that they're seeking eludes them because they're only looking in superficial ways for that fulfillment.
There's this idea that once everybody is equal in terms of labor or something, and I keep thinking, I don't know I don't think if we arrange it all properly structurally, that would necessarily change or get rid of these hungry ghosts that you talk about. And I wonder what you think about and I'm happy and I'm open to, we got to change the capitalist system, we need more socialism for sure. But I wonder how you think about systems like this when people are like, we just need to change the system.
I think that one of the challenges that we have in relation to systems change is that the system is robust as it is, and it's thriving. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. And so when, we think about systems change, personally, I think we think about that in terms of abolition. And we begin to recognize that the systems that currently exist do not serve life. And we we start looking more deeply into the things that people really do need. People have a need for a sense of security in their home, food, medical care, freedom from violence and assault, and the ravages of poverty. Those types of things are not managed by shifting external systems. And so the only thing that we can really change, which will inevitably be the thing that changes the systems, is our dependency on those systems. Because right now, our dependency on those systems is providing them with this artificial form of life support. All of the subsidies and the excessive profit that corporations are making at this time are a direct reflection of our dependency upon these systems. And so we can't expect the system to change that we have so generously provided for, that we have bolstered by our participation. And the challenge for us is going to be living with the discomfort of change. Most people don't want to feel uncomfortable. We have a new staff member here who's lovely, a lovely human being. And, she brought to work a coffee mug that said positive vibes only. And I said, oh, no, we don't do that around here. We live with the full spectrum of emotion in this place. And, just having this awareness that the preference is for, I want to feel good, and if you're not here to make me feel good, then I don't want anything to do with you. And that includes personal and systemic change. Personal and systemic change always shows up in a vehicle that makes you uncomfortable. It creates friction, tension, oftentimes incredible soul-crushing pain. And it is in the aftermath of that shattering pain that we oftentimes find the pathway towards rebuilding ourselves. And I think that for me, the paradox of this incredible beauty mixed with incredible sorrow that often comes with the destruction of self that leads to the opportunity for rediscovery and recreation of self, that brings us closer and closer to the truth of our being, is profound. And so if we can look at the possibility of the rebuilding of the collective self, because we really are, when we get right down to it, one being having individualized, simultaneous experiences of ourself, learning all of these different aspects of ourself. And, if we can see the face of our highest soul in the stranger, in the person who is lost, who has wandered a great distance from their own heart, and we can lovingly lead them back toward that heart rather than condemning them for being lost, we might have a real chance, of moving beyond this time of darkness in a more graceful manner, I guess. I mean, there's no doubt that we're going into it and we're going to go through it. There have been too many things that have happened for us not to have some pretty severe consequences, and just in the environmental arena alone. But there are things that are.
Yeah,
go ahead.
That's something I wanted to ask you about, because you're very familiar with the climate science, and that's where I start to get into some despair, right? Like, okay, well, it'd be one thing to be on a timeline where we weren't also dealing with the collapse of human civilization, and we haven't passed a lot of tipping points already, or we're about to. And so tell me how you think about the climate crisis and the fact that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and all these folks are denying it. And who knows if they'll leave office in 4 years or not. We have no idea. How do you grapple with that? How do you hold that?
I have deep grief. I have this heaviness that I carry with me. I certainly don't have all the answers, and I would never want to pretend to. All I can do is be in deeper relationship with the land that I'm living alongside and upon, and do everything that I can to provide layers of insulation for the harm. And so, the laws of creation and the laws of motion and the laws of change are all interconnected, because what we have is this experience of thoughts and ideas being put into motion. And they have the capacity to crush life. And those thoughts and ideas will remain in motion until they come up against an equal or greater force. And so, how do we become that equal or greater force that then redirects the ideas, restructures and reformulates those things into something that actually is life sustaining and life nurturing, life nourishing, and then set it back in motion again? That is our work right now, is to be an agent of change who is actively working within the field of creation to come up against those thoughts and ideas that have been put in motion that are most harmful. And we do that by having awareness of what's around us, but also by having the capacity to and the space to imagine who and what we most want to be, and looking at what's coming toward us and the way that we can repurpose, reuse, and recycle that into something that is more aligned with a loving and compassionate society that supports the lives of others rather than one that destroys the lives of others. And so, it's that old cliched metaphor of a hammer can be used to pound a nail or to smash a skull. And, how do we take the weapons that have been formed against us and turn them into tools that helps us to compost and aerate the soil to be able to grow something that's more nourishing and more in alignment with the sustainability of life? I don't have all the answers to how we do that. I just know that those are the types of things that I'm thinking about here. And I live on a 215-acre farm. And so we are doing those things. We are composting. We are aerating the soil. We are looking at soil remediation and regenerative forestry, and running educational programs on ecological and environmental justice, and looking at Indigenous knowledge and the leadership that comes from living in a way of life that is aligned with source, that is aligned with the capacity for living a harmonized and balanced life, and helping people to learn how to do that in practical, tangible ways wherever they are. And so that's the work that I'm going to do, and I think that everybody has their own piece of that work. And you know what your work is. You may not know how to do it, but you know what it is. And it's always about how do we care for the greatest number of people given what we have. And so, thinking about richness within our communities being the capacity to give. You're considered to be wealthy if you have the capacity to give. And how do we find ways during this time to dig within ourselves to see what do we have to give this society that is being fleeced before our eyes. How do we care for those who are most vulnerable? And how do we feed people who are hungry? We don't feed them with thoughts and prayers. We bring them a bowl of soup or some rice and beans or, my daughter one time when she was in high school, we were living in Tucson at the time, and I went and got her stuff for lunch, and Tuesday morning she had nothing for lunch. And I said, what did you do with all of the things that you had for lunch? You just bought all of this food, for lunch. And we went back and forth. She hemmed and hawed for a while about it. And then she said, I made all of the sandwiches that I could and packed all of the lunches that I could and went to the park on my lunch break and handed them out to the homeless people in the park.
Yeah.
A teenage girl in high school who is making a difference in somebody's life. And so millions of us making sandwiches for the people in the park, standing in front of those who are being targeted, buying up whatever medical supplies we need to help those who are at risk of being denied medical care. What can we do for the causes and the vulnerable populations that are most dear to our hearts? We find our work not by trying to do everything, but by doing what our heart calls us to do in the most effective and efficient way that we can.
Well, that's a really beautiful thought. And I actually have friends in our community. I'm going to give a shout out to Mimi Pelig, who has a garden and grows food and takes that food and takes it everywhere in our community to give to people who are unhoused. And she does this every week. And she doesn't have an organization. She doesn't get any accolades. She doesn't get any grants. She just does it. And so I just want to acknowledge that work is already happening and we can expand it. Everyone might do something a bit different. And I imagine when you're talking about the place where you live and where you're teaching, is that the Land Peace Foundation?
Yes.
Okay. And do you want to give out the website for that as well as your own website so people can find you if they want to?
Sure. So the Land Peace Foundation is landpeacefoundation.org, LANDPEACE, foundation, FOUNDATION.org. My personal email address, website is very outdated. It's sacredinstructions.life. I was listening to you read the bio, and I think it's been 16 at this point now, anthologies and other books that I've contributed to since Sacred Instructions came out. And so there's the Land Peace Foundation here where we are. We've named this place, this campus, Wajukum Tiltina Kinship Community. And Wajukum Tiltina means let's help one another. So.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And also I think it looks like you're involved in some social justice campaigning around pushing back on the state of Maine. I don't know if that's current or not, but to honor treaty rights and to acknowledge who actually should be stewarding the land. Is that still happening?
I think that work is ongoing. There's a lot of inroads that are being made. Unfortunately, we have a governor in the state of Maine who has a history of abysmal relationships with tribal nations. And so that's been a challenge. But we do have a lot of lawmakers in the state and a lot of allies in the state in various organizations and agencies who have more evolved thinking than our governor does, who have been working closely with tribal representatives to address some of those issues. And I think one of the challenges that we're facing here, which I'm sure other people can relate to, is the greenwashing agendas of politicians who are trying to push through, these green technology solutions that are not going to solve our problems as the next big savior movement, and acting with a sense of urgency that is just a mechanism for denying the will of the people and the wisdom of the people on the ground. And I think that that's probably one of the greatest challenges that we have at this time is how do we get those who are in decision-making positions to begin working with the wisdom of the people on the ground and the will of the people to address climate change and the loss of biodiversity and all of the other things that are putting us at incredible risk, the contamination of our waters, the commercialization and privatization of our commons, including our water. All of those types of things need to be addressed in ways that are honoring of the intelligence of those who are making the decisions. I think that a lot of decision makers are feeling forced to operate away from their own moral principles and ethical awareness, and also are being forced to deny the intelligence of their own minds, the wisdom and the vision of their own eyes. And that path leads to destruction. And so hopefully we have leaders who are more courageous, who begin to emerge and can help us to face the realities that we're looking at in a way that is respectful of the sacredness of life and of their own intelligence and their own heart-based wisdom.
Thank you so much, Sherri Mitchell. Do you have any last sentence? We're at the top of the hour. We're actually a little past time, but do you have anything that you want to say to people who are listening that occurs to you? Something short that they can take away?
I think the thing that I would encourage people to do is to every day do the things that are somewhat cliche. Find 5 things that you're grateful for and 3 people that you love dearly, and dedicate the work of that day in gratitude to those things that you're grateful for and in service to those people that you love.
Thank you so much, Sherri, for coming on the show.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Sherri Mitchell, again, is the author of, you have to get this book, Sacred Instructions, Indigenous Wisdom for Living Spirit-Based Change. And she's also in a lot of anthologies and climate books and ecology books. So please look up Sherri Mitchell. And we're going to have to go now. Moment of Truth gives many, many thanks to our team, Nyanko Nyasu, sound and tech engineer, and our research and production team, Nyanko, Mailing Obinata, Todd Zimmerman, and Vara Ramakrishnan. Todd Zimmerman of Native Verse Studios created the theme song. Kathy Krizik created our logo. Find our podcast of this show and others at all your favorite podcast sites under Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills. Episode notes and links to resources are at our program page at www.ksqd.org. Thanks to our KSQD program manager, Howard Feldstein, and the entire KSQD team on the California Central Coast. Please contact us at amyami@ksqd.org with questions or comments. And remember, if we don't use our democracy, we lose our democracy. And let us pray we are not learning that lesson right now, and it is not too late. Okay, thanks everybody. Peace out.